Good morning, committee members. Bon matin à tous.
Good morning, everyone.
Open today's meeting. Welcome to meeting number 7 of the HUMA committee. Pursuant to motion adopted on Thursday, September the 18th, 2025, the committee is meeting on youth employment in Canada. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, meaning people are participating in the room and virtually on screen. Before we begin, I would like to go over a few points. You have the option of choosing to participate in this meeting in the official language of your choice. Interpretation is available in the room. I would ask all members to get familiar that you're on the right channel before we begin. As well, those appearing virtually, use the globe icon at the bottom of your surface and choose the official language of your choice. If there is an interruption in translation, please get my attention. We'll suspend whilst corrected. To those appearing virtually, to do that, simply use the raised hand icon. All witnesses appearing virtually have been tested and have meet the required technical requirements for today's meeting. Please, those in the room, if you could put your devices on silence mode so that they do not ring during the meeting, which can cause issues for the translators as well. Familiarize yourself with the microphone, and please refrain from tapping it, because again it can cause issues to our translators. Please address all questions through I, the chair. Wait until I recognize you before proceeding. And for those on Zoom, we went through those particular points. So we're beginning with the first hour of panel witness. And we have appearing in this one from the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, Heather Piurat, Director, Energy, Natural Resources and Environment. From the National Council of Unemployed Workers, Milan Bernard, co-spokesperson. And from the Provincial Employment Roundtable, we have Nicholas Salter and Morgan Ganon, Executive Director and Director of Policy and Research. We'll begin each one. Those appearing two will choose which one is going to give your opening comments. You have 5 minutes to give your opening comments, and then we will open the floor to questions. And I would remind 5 minutes. As you're at 5 minutes, I will say thank you, which means I would expect you to wrap up shortly after I thank you for your presentation. So we'll begin today with the Macdonald-Laurier Institute for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to speak to you today. I think everyone across the political spectrum can unite around the goal of lowering youth employment, which stands at a historically high level of 14.5%. As we all understand, in practice, that translates into tests.
Merci. L'interprète me signale que le réseau est instable et que c'est difficile de faire l'interprétation. Merci.
A moment, there was. It's not translating. Okay. We'll come back to you, Madame Pirat. We'll move to Milan Bernard. If you could proceed with your opening statement.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Merci aux députés.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the committee for this opportunity to speak to you. Today I'm speaking on behalf of the National Council of Unemployed Persons, which defends the rights of the jobless, helps workers on the ground, and defends them to improve the employment insurance program. Youth employment is an important economic indicator. The situation reflects a tremendous instability and uncertainty. linked to the trade war with the US. There is a crisis. When cuts are made to employers, then it is the last in, first out, which are often young people, and they're just not hired. So I think it's alarming to see that the government is not setting a good example by eliminating 2,000 student jobs in the public service and cutting staff, particularly among young people. Employment among young people is becoming fragile. These are good jobs, and that means the transmission of skills and the public service is becoming more fragile as well. In response to tariffs, the government had established temporary employment insurance measures in spring, extending the period during which benefits could be received, as well as rules for compensation. The third measure is also coming to an end. It provides greater eligibility to employment insurance in the event of economic instability. By refusing to extend these measures, the government doesn't seem to understand how vulnerable people are. What they're doing instead is providing additional weeks for so-called workers who have been there a long time, leaving by the wayside thousands of others by restoring a discriminatory measure implemented by a former government. By targeting these workers who've been there a long time, this creates an artificial and unfair division among workers by setting aside young people and making it impossible for them to get this support. Many workers are being excluded from the automotive industry in particular, those who were supposed to be targeted by that measure and those who have been affected by long periods of inactivity these last few years. And many part-time workers are also being excluded. 75% of those are women, many of them young women. We haven't even mentioned seasonal workers, who are very important to the Quebec and Canadian economy. And crisis after crisis are being excluded and are excluded yet again. By abandoning seasonal workers, we abandon their security. The best way of fighting precarious work is to provide a proper safety net, social safety net, which can provide real protection. I encourage the government to make sure workers have real protection when they are unemployed, regardless of the economic crises. Larger eligibility review of sanctions already in place, extending existing measures and improving benefits for carers would be very helpful. We are repeating the suggestions submitted to your colleagues on the Finance Committee during pre-budget consultations. The government can come back on some of those decisions, get back on track, and respect its commitments, which it has repeated election after election. Thank you for your attention. I'll be pleased to answer your questions in the official language of your choice.
Merci, Mr. Bernard.
Thank you, Mr. Bernard.
Employment Roundtable. Which presenter is giving it? Madame Salter, or Mr. Salter, or Madame Gano? Mr. Salter, I believe you're on mute.
Could be his headset specific.
If you could check the physical headset to see, you may have muted it. On the cord?
I did not.
There you
hear
are.
me now?
Okay, yes.
Okay, I just had to plug and unplug, the classic unplug and blow on it. Teasing. Okay, well, good morning, Mr. Chair, Vice Chairs, and honorable members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear today and contribute to this discussion on youth employment in Canada. My name is Nicholas Salter. I'm the Executive Director of the Provincial Employment Roundtable, otherwise known as PERT. And I'm joined by my colleague, Morgan Gagnon, our Director of Policy and Research. So for those who don't know us, PERT is a nonpartisan organization dedicated to improving the economic and employment outcomes of Quebec's English-speaking communities through evidence-based research and policy recommendations. I'm here today to establish that our community's youth and PERT's work to understand and serve them are actually a case study for the types of targeted support that diverse groups of Canadian youth need to flourish in the labor market. One-size-fits-all solutions will not get the job done. Responsive interventions designed and delivered by community organizations are key. So let me explain what I mean. So in Quebec, English-speaking youth sit at the intersection of actually two vulnerable populations in the workforce, youth and official language minorities. They experience the same labor market detachment, uncertainty, and instability that many young Canadians face, while also carrying the added weight of language barriers. We recently received funding from Canadian Heritage to dig deeper into the employment issues facing English-speaking youth. We conducted focus groups with over 50 youth and surveyed 200 more. And then we paired our findings with data from the 2021 census to build a more robust statistical portrait. We broke down the youth cohort in specific age brackets to understand the different issues each group faces. Together, these sources offer a detailed and frankly, actually a concerning picture of how English-speaking youth fare in the provincial labor market. Allow me to share three of our core findings. The first, English-speaking youth in Quebec are starting their careers at a disadvantage. They're struggling to break into and remain in the labor force compared to their French-speaking counterparts. This is evident in their labor force participation rates, which lag behind those of French speakers by more than 6 percentage points. Their unemployment rate is almost double, 13.1% compared to 7.8%, and that gap widens among those under 25 to 17.4% versus 10.9%. Among youth in rural and remote regions of Quebec, these gaps are wider still. English-speaking youth in Gaspésie, La Madeleine, and Côte-Nord, for example, have unemployment rates of 27.7% and 21.8% respectively. Our second key findings help to contextualize the data. 3 out of 4 youth in our survey describe the job market as discouraging. Despite strong confidence in both their technical and soft skills, and that's the good news, they were confident, many expressed doubt that their skills will be enough to secure meaningful employment. Over half of all respondents identified French proficiency as a barrier to employment, one that limits not only their job opportunities, but also their ability to build professional connections and access to information needed to secure meaningful employment. Given this finding, it's not surprising that when we launched a linguistic mentorship program last year called Circumflex, where all accents are welcome, the vast majority of interested mentees were young people. Third, and finally, our research shows that these issues are compounded by a lack of institutional support. We surveyed English language employment service providers and regional community organizations about their experiences with the federal Youth Employment and Skills Strategy, YES measures, and the provincial Jeunes en Mouvement vers l'Emploi program. Not one had received support from the Jeunes en Mouvement program. So what this actually really means is that a generation of English-speaking youth in Quebec is left waiting for the support they need. And this brings me back to my original point. English-speaking youth need and deserve programs that truly reflect their reality, initiatives that integrate French language learning and networking alongside job search support. The same is true across Canada. Immigrant youth, Francophone youth in other provinces, Indigenous youth in rural and remote areas, youth with disabilities, and so many others need supports that are tailored to their lived experiences. Furthermore, these efforts must be led by local organizations that have the direct expertise to create responsive programs and the network to ensure these programs actually reach and engage youth. PERT's work offers a model for how this can be achieved. We bring community organizations together with stakeholders and experts to implement evidence-based programs and coordinate them to ensure adherence to best practices and consistent evaluation. We implore the government to invest and scale this type of model across the country, meeting the needs of our youth as well as those across Canada. We therefore urge this committee to consider the following recommendations. Stronger federal provincial coordination to deliver on youth employability program, in our case more specifically, commitments to Quebec's English-speaking communities and organizations to ensure adequate distribution of resources. Number 2, implementation of programs that are accessible when and where youth need them. And finally, 3, a renewed recognition of the linguistic, identity-based, and other regional realities that youth live every day. We are confident that with this targeted support, we can reverse the trends we're seeing today, not only in the employment data, but in the discouragement youth are reporting. They want to contribute, empower us to empower them. Je vous remercie encore une fois de m'avoir donné l'occasion de partager ces résultats.
Thank you again for this opportunity to share the results, and I'll be happy to answer your questions in English or French.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you.
Now,
Great, we'll try this again. So I think everyone across the political spectrum can unite around the goal of lowering youth unemployment, which stands at a historically high level of 14.5%. In practice, that translates into pessimism and resentment, lost opportunities to build skills and networks, dependence on other family members, and economic hardship. It represents a failure to launch. Although I expect many in your study will have ideas on programs and training to make youth more employable, at a fundamental level, the problem is that the economy is weak, and there aren't enough firms hiring workers. The challenge of youth unemployment won't be solved without a hotter jobs market. Many times, the energy and natural resources sectors have driven employment growth in Canada. This is especially true when commodity cycles are swinging up and there's lots of new construction. Right now, those sectors, unfortunately, are experiencing investment weakness in Canada. Shareholders do not see Canada as a growth economy and are rewarding share buybacks and dividends rather than reallocating capital here. They think they can get higher returns in other jurisdictions and in other sectors. Prime Minister Carney has said Canada needs to build here at home at speeds not seen in generations. We would all like that. But the policy and regulatory environment of the last 10 years is still very much in place and is dissuading the private capital needed to build new mines, pipelines, railroads, power generation, and transmission in Canada, and the jobs it would take to build those things. To many in industry, it feels as though the recent rhetoric has been positive, but actual regulatory changes have not manifested. A more welcoming investment environment could unleash tens of billions in new capital spending and create hundreds of thousands of good jobs. Many of those jobs would be in rural and remote areas, meaning that Northern and Indigenous youth would be able to stay home and build their lives and careers near their communities. I think catalyzing our resource sector is an important way to alleviate youth unemployment. But there's another side of the equation we need to deal with, and that is the lack of skilled labor to develop all those projects. In particular, we need more skilled trades. I live outside Calgary, which is Canada's fastest growing city. We need to build more houses, schools, hospitals, roads, and services to keep up with population growth. My own nephew is in his third year of carpentry here. His cohort could handle 16 students, but only 10 have registered. His experience is borne out in the statistics. Across North America, for every 7 tradespeople that retire or leave the space, they're replaced with just 1. I don't know where we'll get enough journeyman carpenters or electricians or linemen or plumbers to build things at speeds not seen before. I think we have spent a decade and more devaluing the building trades. It is seen as a lesser career path and something that requires a university degree. I thought the market would solve this problem, as the trades tend to offer higher paying jobs out of school, but they still face a lack of status. And this is my point. Our youth have been told that working in resource extractive industries and heavy industry is bad and that it has no future. They have often been discouraged from entering blue-collar careers. There should be no surprise that we are now facing a labor crunch in those sectors, even as we have high unemployment. To help address youth employment in Canada, we not only have to create a more welcoming regulatory and investment environment for the resource sector, we also have to value the people that work in those sectors so our youth feel comfortable choosing that career path. Thank you for your attention. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Exner-Perot, for all three for your excellent presentations to the committee. We'll begin with the first round of questioning for 6 minutes with Ms. Goodrich. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for their testimony here today. Ms. Exner-Perot, as the Member of Parliament for Fort McMurray-Cold Lake, your testimony is bang on. Growing up in Fort McMurray, I heard so many stories of people that would go off, get a university education, couldn't find employment, and then come up to Fort McMurray to find a trade and have an amazing life. Why do you believe that trades are so undervalued across Canada?
Well, this is, a decades-long trajectory. I myself have 3 liberal arts degrees, and so I'm a victim, of the trend of encouraging people to go to university. And it was seen as, the path to middle classhood in Canada was to go into university. If your kids went into university, you made it. And we started to discount the contributions of, I would say, blue-collar workers, construction workers, skilled trades, vis-a-vis those professional kinds of services. And we've seen it repeated by our elites as well. I think UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has said explicitly, don't go into oil and gas. There is no future in that sector. You won't be doing the world any good. We have had our own Canadian politicians say, you should choose coding. You should go into coding instead of these resource sectors. You should know us for our resourcefulness, not our resources. And so that has affected, obviously, what youth perceive as their path to a good career and to a good status. Like I say, you see in the economics are transitioning where you know, if you do have a journeyman trade, you will probably have a good job and a good career. You can afford a house, you can support a family. But the status seems to still be lacking. And that is why I think not enough youth are choosing those trades where we do see that we will have a labor crunch. And so at least part of the problem with youth unemployment is that they're attracted to jobs for which there aren't enough people on the other end hiring.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I see it on a regular basis. And I think the government's last 10 years of saying that the energy industry is bad and we need to transition away from those jobs has made a lot of teenagers and youth choose other careers because they've been told by government that this is a bad industry and something that it won't be here for their lifetime. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about how some of the emissions cap policies, the policies surrounding overall anti-energy rules and regulations like the emissions cap and the shipping ban, how they are impacting investment and therefore new jobs in these sectors.
Well, great question. And you mentioned, Fort McMurray, and we all remember the heydays, especially if you're from out west, of the hiring and the jobs that came in that boom time of between 2006 and 2014. And you could get a great job and you could support a family. You could have a great life. My uncle lives in Fort McMurray. And that has obviously declined. Part of it is just global commodity markets. We won't be naive and blame it all at the feet of certain policies, but certainly it means that Canada has to be more competitive right now in attracting that investment. Right now, global commodities are globally traded, and that means the capital will just go to whatever jurisdiction is going to get the best return on investment. In Canada, where we're, for example, the only oil exporting country that has put on an emissions cap or has threatened to put on emissions cap, that obviously is a signal to investors, don't put your money here. And we see it in mining and forestry and certain other sectors, similar conditions, where this is just going to be a very highly expensive jurisdiction, an uncompetitive jurisdiction for return on investment, and the money goes elsewhere. Our resources are very valuable, but we have to allow capital to grow when it comes to Canada, and most of our policies and regulations have not allowed for that.
Thank you. I actually know your Uncle Gary. Fort McMurray is the biggest small town, so shout out to Gary. One of the questions I have, and one of the things that I see having grown up in Fort McMurray again and having lived there most of my life, is the Indigenous participation in the workforce is substantially higher than the rest of Canada. In fact, it sits at about 6% of the workforce, whereas Indigenous people make up approximately 3.3% of the Canadian workforce overall. So having a limit to job and investment in energy industry actually has a huge impact on economic reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. And I was wondering if you have seen any trends across Canada of Indigenous employment going down as a result of these bad Liberal policies.
Well, you will know in your own area, and I do some work with the Indigenous Resource Network, and you might have gotten those statistics from work that we did. Although I might have newer data, it was 3.9% of the Canadian workforce, but it's actually 6.9% in oil and gas, 10.8% in mining, and 9.2% in forestry. It's no surprise that Indigenous people are more prevalent in resource sectors because their communities are in places where it's more natural resource dependent. And so I have seen, and I have personal friends who are not getting the jobs, not getting the contracts. Most of them are small business owners because there isn't growth happening in Alberta, in Northeast BC, the way that there could be if we had a more welcoming environment. So people loan for the boom years. Even 2022 was a little bit better, a bit more capital expenditures, a bit higher prices. But having a more competitive environment would certainly stir more investment, and that would create more jobs and contracts for small business owners, many of whom are Indigenous.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate all of the witnesses.
Goodrich, Madame de Rocher, pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Desrochers, 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup aux témoins.
Thank you to the witnesses here today with us this morning. Thank you for taking the time to share your views. My first question is for Nicola and/or Morgan.
has invested quite a bit to make changes to the official language policies and workplace, as well as investing in communities in minority language situation. Do you think that these have brought on notable changes? Do you think those have been helpful in dealing with the situation you describe with respect to, I guess, I know you're speaking about English speaker in Quebec, but you also referred to other people across Canada in minority situation.
Sorry, and you're speaking with the specific investments in the Official Languages Act and the new Languages Action Plan?
Yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, just getting those out the door has been quite delayed. So we have not seen the impact of any of those investments. So the announcements were made over 2 years ago, but there's been significant delay in the allocation of those funds. So they haven't had the impact that we've hoped. We certainly hope that they do. They're not necessarily targeted to youth more specifically. So I think the stats, and then so I think they will, and ideally help English-speaking youth in Quebec. But the kind of specific interventions, particularly one paired with language training and kind of holistic approach that English-speaking youth need, may not be provided by those existing funds.
Okay. Thank you. J'ai une question pour. I have a for Ms. Asner-Pixot. Thank you. So I guess my question is twofold. So thank you for sharing your perspective on the energy sector. In the recent work we've been doing in the platform and how we're looking at initiatives to address the situation, because I think we've all agreed that there is a gap, and this was also part of last week's discussion around a mismatch between the skills that our youth have and what the labor market is requiring. And I'm just wondering if, in your view, programs like the one we have proposed, where we would provide up to $8,000 for apprenticeship training for skilled youth, if you think that would be helpful, first of all. And then, if not, what else can the federal government do to encourage youth to actually go into those sectors, into those skills?
Yeah, this is a great question, and I'll base it. I used to work at the University of Saskatchewan doing a lot of work with Northern and Indigenous programs. And at the time that I was there, it was in the last commodities boom. Uranium was booming, potash was booming, and there was a real skills shortage, a labor shortage. And the colleges were trying to do whatever they could to get more youth into the programs. And then the bust happened, and there was a mismatch between what was promised, youth had been trained up, and then there's nothing on the other end. And so I think for many disadvantaged youth, Northern and Indigenous youth in particular, having that assistance to go to school is very important, and making it easier for them to choose trades or other things that we have a skill shortage in. But it's also extremely important that there's a job for them on the other end of that. And it'd be extremely discouraging to go and take the step out, maybe leave your community, move your family to go undertake training, but then there's no job on the other end of it. So, in any economic analysis, I think you'll find that a high-paying job and availability of those high-paying jobs, on the other hand, on the other side, are the best incentive for going into these trades. But absolutely, I do think in the case of Indigenous Northern youth that I spent a long time with, that kind of thing would be helpful.
Follow up. So I'm trying to understand, because so we're saying the youth are not taking the skills trade that we want, but we're saying there's no job on the other side of it. But at the same time, we hear from employers that they don't have the people don't have the right skills. So I'm just trying to understand, what would be your recommendation in getting a better match, and how can the federal government help with this?
Yeah.
Great
question. This is a chicken and the egg question that I've seen play out in resource sectors many times. And part of it is that the sector doesn't want to grow if it doesn't think it had the skilled labor force to grow with. If it thinks it's going to be extremely expensive, to do new construction. We've seen a lack of productivity, frankly, in some of the big major projects that we've had out west in the last 5 years, where the labor force just was a lot more expensive, a lot slower, a lot less productive than I think was the expectation of the proponents. And so there is a mismatch. It is a bit of a chicken and the egg. I think helping to create investment and having a line of sight on major projects being built, and then in tandem with that, trying to work with employers, and I mean, they have lots of opinions, and they're not shy about them, as I'm sure they'll be in this study, of what particular skills trade is that is really being that bottleneck. And I'll just give you one more example. In Saskatchewan with Cameco, this is the world's biggest publicly traded uranium company. They're doing an expansion. Uranium is a hot commodity, a hot market, and they are not producing as much. This is in their disclosures. They are not able to expand as fast and produce as much because of skills shortages. And so it is definitely tricky. But I think in general we know that trades will be in higher demand.
De Rocher, Madame Gill, pour
Ms. Gill, 6 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I'd also like to thank all witnesses who have shared their ideas with us. We're very interested in their views. I'd have a lot to say. But first of all, I'd like to put a question to Mr. Slater and Mr. Gagnon, because as a member for the North Shore region, you really interested me by talking about the difficulties that some young people had in finding jobs on the North Shore. You talked about the lower North Shore, which is also in my region. And as far as I'm concerned, the language issue does play a role, even though that part of the region has very strong links with Labrador and Newfoundland, and these are essentially Anglophone communities. They have been for the past 150 years. I also believe there are other considerations in jurisdictions, federal jurisdictions, where young people could be helped to find jobs and to help them remain in their communities, because that is something they would often like to do. There are many things I'd like to put before you. For example, Mr. Bernard was talking about employment insurance, the social safety net. There's a lot of seasonal work in the region. Young people are often involved in that as well. There's no social safety net. They have to live through the black hole, and then they have to wonder whether they can move or whether they can stay in the community. But yes, you don't have to remain in the fishing industry, but it can be difficult to switch. Now we're seeing there's a conflict with Canada Post. On the lower North Shore, the only link with the continent, and I'm calling it the continent, is Canada Post. So strikes threaten the service there, and for the lower North Shore, that means not only products, but also problems with training. I know that they've been working on a variety of projects, but there's no mail anymore. Airports. Air Canada doesn't provide service to the North Shore anymore because it didn't make enough money for them. Apologies. I'm very enthusiastic about this. And upgrading airports, upgrading ports for fishing, that's not being done in the region. These young people were mostly fishers. So how are we to transform our economy when the infrastructure isn't being upgraded? I haven't even mentioned the highway. The Trans-Canada doesn't go there. So how do people travel? In skidoos in the winter and by boat in the summer. There's no air transport. It costs too much. So how are we to remain in our communities? There's no EI. There's nothing. There is a ferry, but it's dependent on Newfoundland. It's Newfoundland that provides a link, not even the federal government. I haven't even mentioned fishing. The Department of Fisheries and Oceans could provide more licenses or provide secondary processing in the region, because there are so many skills in the region. We could be focusing on SEALs, they're young fishers, entrepreneurs. Michael Shepard, for example, from the Lower North Shore, they have so many ideas. So you did mention language, but all these issues that are so important to these communities who want to remain, where people want to remain in their communities and at the same time contribute to their economy. So do you think the federal government could take some of those ideas to help young people keep their jobs or even to create jobs? Thank you. Yes, there are many ideas in there. A few months ago, I was in the region, and I would invite everybody to go see how things are there. I met people on the ground. They're extremely passionate. It's an unbelievable part of the country. I even met some colleagues from the riding office, your riding office. So, yes, you've raised a number of issues that involve economic development, infrastructure, fisheries. So employability and skills development, I'll say two things on that. Those are two things. The EI system also needs to be reformed so that young people can adapt. And that would help the young people. The committee also talked about technical or vocational training. English-speaking Quebecers are only half as present in technical and professional jobs as our Francophone Quebecers. So we need to encourage English-speaking young people to go into technical and professional careers. This applies to the Lower North Shore, but in many other regions, there's lack of access to the programs. There are only a few people who look to get that training, so the quotas are too small, and there are not enough interested students to keep the programs going. And learning French, the help is needed there. Subsidies are needed, contributions to help young people improve their French skills or to complete a technical and professional degree so that they can also get on-the-job training or learn French on the job. That should be seen as a skill, and it should be remunerated. So assistance in those areas would be an excellent start.
Gill, merci.
Thank you, Ms. Gill.
Monsieur Salter.
Mr. Salter.
Thank you, Chair, and I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today. Ms. Exner-Pirot, thank you for your comments. I am on the east side, or west, I'm on the west side of Saskatchewan. So Lloydminster is kind of where my home ground is. So I resonate with a lot of what you're saying. And so building off what was said earlier, we know that Mark Carney promised to grow the economy and build Canada at unprecedented speeds, yet his government's refused to reverse anti-energy policies like Bill C-69, the shipping ban, the industrial carbon tax, and emissions caps that are all driving investment away, which is what we have heard in this meeting. But my question is, beyond the direct jobs that are in the energy sector, how does the this loss of investment affect indirect employment and related industries that support those workers and those communities?
This is a great question, because I think sometimes people think resource extraction only serves, oil is only for Alberta, potash and uranium are only for Saskatchewan, natural gas is only for BC. But I can tell you I've done some research, for example, on the oil sands, and cumulatively, the oil sands have spent $1 trillion, have spent that in Canada. About a third is royalties and taxes, also to municipalities, but a very substantial amount of that is on manufacturing. And there's hundreds of companies in Ontario and Quebec and across the rest of the country that supply the oil sands, which is a huge spender domestically in this country. And so when you're a period like they are right now, where there isn't a lot of new construction, there aren't a lot of new facilities, then you don't need the steel, you don't need the aluminum, you don't need the manufactured goods, everything that those large companies require. Same with mining. Again, it's you're manufacturing heavy equipment. which Canada is quite good at, but that right now, if it's harder to open up a mine, then you just don't need as much of that equipment. You don't need the construction, you don't need the camps and the catering, and also the transportation that goes into it. And so obviously it has tremendous indirect impacts on the economy.
Right. And so then those royalties and taxes obviously going to provincial or federal governments, who then can use it on our social services such as hospitals, education, et cetera, which would then give a better quality of life to Canadians in actually any part of the country. Would you agree with that?
Well, it is, and royalties accrue generally to the provinces, and they use that for healthcare and education in particular. And healthcare is obviously one of the employment categories that we need a lot more as our population ages. And so you can hire more people when you have the resource sector pays royalties. That is what makes it, so important to provincial governments. And so the more royalties that you have, the more that the healthcare and education and social sectors can also hire.
Okay, thank you. If the government continues with its current approach, what long-term effects do you foresee for Canada's energy sector and the employment prospects of young Canadians?
So it's already having effects now, obviously, and it's been much discussed. We talk about the just transition. Certainly that talk discouraged people from going into the resource sector. We saw, for example, petroleum engineering programs, shut down in Alberta, even though this is still a sector that produces $160 billion a year. There's not enough people for petroleum engineering, program that would graduate a couple of students a year. So we're already seeing the medium-term impacts of that. You do see, a demographic bubble in the resource sector and in the trades, in construction, where obviously it is aging, and you have more people in their 40s and 50s, and that is the gray tsunami. And I'm sure you'll hear it from other trade associations. That is the gray tsunami that we're very worried about. That they're still in the workforce, but they will all soon start to retire, and there's just nothing that's going to replace them. And so, we're still a G7 country. We still have 41 million people. We're still growing at a phenomenal rate. Who is going to build that infrastructure to help us catch up on all the infrastructure gaps we have, including in housing?
Yes, exactly. What regulatory or policy changes would have the greatest impact in attracting investment in creating career opportunities for young Canadians here in Canada?
Again, I'll just go back to that the best thing we can do is a hot jobs market to lower the youth unemployment rate. And so things that would literally attract tens of billions of dollars. I'm at the Business Council of Canada meeting here, and you can see the potential, but they feel very stymied of obviously LNG terminals, the pipeline that is being built, natural gas pipeline. Those are big major projects that will hire, thousands of people and also lots of contracts. But pipelines from Alberta, bitumen pipeline from Alberta, we already saw with Trans Mountain. There's very good economic analysis on how that contributed to the Alberta and BC and Canadian economies and how many jobs that created. Obviously building some new mines. We would like to build some more critical minerals mines. You need the railroads and the ports to be enhanced to sustain that. So all these big, and also transmission and power generation, if we wanted, to hop onto the AI.
Thank you, Ms. Exner-Perot. Madame Koutrakis for 5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le
Ms. Koutrakis, 5 minutes.
for being here today and for your excellent testimony. My first question is to Ms. Exner-Perot. My perception is that youth employment is always among the first to be hit when the economy is going through difficult times. And even though 95% of our exports to the U.S. are tariff exempt under HUMA, our steel, aluminum, autos, forestry are being hit hard by the Trump tariffs. But the uncertainty affecting Canadian businesses is also having a large impact on the economy. Would it not be reasonable to assume that all these would hit youth unemployment first and quickly, and that the Trump tariffs explain much or most of the youth unemployment increase this year? And if any of the other witnesses would like to chime in, I'd like to hear your thoughts.
So those are obviously having a huge impact. Immigration, obviously, I'm sure you hear from other witnesses about how the impact of immigration has affected youth unemployment. But I guess I would draw from Prime Minister Carney. Those are things that are driven by the United States that we have to deal with. But there are things we can do in our own house to help our own selves, and certainly making this country more competitive for foreign investment is something that I've heard Minister Hodgson speak about, seeking to attract, going to Europe, soon going to Asia to try to attract that investment. In talking about critical minerals and energy, we saw that when they went to Berlin, what they led with, what the speeches were about, was attracting more investment to energy and to critical minerals. So I think that's a great strategy. I'm glad they're seeking to attract that investment, but there's still things we need to do at home to improve the regulatory and policy environment so that those foreign investors see a good business case for investing in Canada. And then, yes, hopefully if we can unlock all that, that would certainly help drive down youth unemployment.
If I may add, before any other witness adds comments, this is exactly why we, before Rose for the summer break, we're doing the One Canadian Economy bill. It's to ensure that we are delivering the projects that are required for good-paying jobs here in Canada. So, I think from what I hear from your response, I am hearing that you think that the government, this current government, is doing all the right things and looking in the right direction to make sure that we do create those good-paying jobs here in Canada for Canadians and our economy.
So good question. So the oil and gas CEOs have written 3 different letters. I think they're up to about 96 oil and gas CEOs signing on to a letter asking for 5 specific policy changes. None of those policy changes have yet been made. So while I think everyone, in Western Canada agrees that the tone is much better and prioritizing major projects is very positive, nothing has happened to unleash the capital that people have out here that would make them actually be able to go to their boards and make final investment decisions and say, I have certainty that I will get a better return on investment. And so I hope that they also look at what industry is specifically asking for. And I don't think we'll see the investment come in until they do.
I have a minute and a half.
Respond here.
Yes, please.
Yeah, and I do think obviously increasing investment is important in Canada, but I do think the skills mismatch piece is really important as well to keep in mind. Employers are saying that there's a scarcity of kind of employees to meet their needs of their job requirements. And so it's really important when you think about what you can do at this committee in terms of providing youth the ability to be agile in the labor market and retrain themselves. I think that's pretty essential and very much on mission for how I understand the committee's mandate. But I know my colleague Morgan Gagnon also had a comment to make as well, so I wanted to hand it over to her and let her have a chance to speak.
Thank you, Nick. Here in Quebec, we have a wonderful model through our CPMT structure that brings together labor market groups representing industry regions and different vulnerable workers in the labor force. And I think that is a meaningful intervention that gets everybody around the table talking about the same topic. So in this context, what that enables us to do at the provincial level is to have the interests of youth group, of industry, and of the regions, for example, come together to talk about what specific skills mismatches might look like in the region. And from our lens, when we're talking about the English-speaking community in particular, that training also always needs a linguistic component to ensure that our communities are able to, our youth are able to integrate successfully into the predominantly Francophone market. And that's something that's mirrored for Francophone youth in the rest of Canada. It's a common thread for some immigrant youth as well, and that attention to the specific context that the youth are facing and that they need addressed in order to integrate into their local labor market, particularly so they don't, as Heather had mentioned, have to move at great distances. They're able to stay rooted in their communities with those supports.
Madame Koutrakis, Madame Gill, pour 2 minutes et 30 secondes.
Ms. Gill, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Mr. Bernard. I listened to your presentation, and I can't say I disagree with anything in it. In fact, it's good to hear you say these things. It's been years since I've been advocating for employment insurance to be reformed. There are always reasons were given for why it can't be done. I've worked in other areas, and we've been waiting for that reform for at least 20 years. So should the government go ahead and do that, given that there is a crisis, as they did for support measures during COVID? Why not move ahead with reform? Have there been enough consultations? Thank you for the question. There was an opening, really, as we came out of the COVID crisis. There were consultations, and we were hoping that, well, it wasn't even partisan. A lot of people thought we could go ahead, perhaps not reforms as extensive as we would have liked to see, as workers would like to see, but still reforms that would have provided genuine improvements. However, those initiatives were halted, and all kinds of reasons were given, like it's the computer system and other things. But so it didn't happen. There's a quotation I like very much from the former Labor Secretary, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who said the purpose of a social measure isn't just to deal with a given problem, but to deal with the problems that it will lead to later. So when you've got structures in place, when there are problems and economic shocks, then we have a robust EI system that genuinely protects workers. But by contrast, except for some minor improvements over the past 5 years, what we've seen is basically the system being dismantled, the EI system being dismantled. So we're ready to go, just needs to be implemented. Well, it's interesting because my predecessor, Mr. Pierre Serret, had testified before a number of House of Commons committees. And at one point he said it was like the Nike slogan, just do it. All that remains to be done is just to get on with it. But it's a question of political will. There's been a majority of vote in Parliament. Even during a minority government, there's a majority that is in support to reform or at least improve the EI system. Thank you, Ms. Gill.
For five minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Just reflecting on this, I think, really interesting discussion. It seems to me that we talk a lot in Parliament about those who are disproportionately affected by problems. And I certainly think that that discussion has an important place. But the fundamental problem with youth unemployment isn't disproportionate impact. It's severe economic problems caused by policy that are hurting the job market overall. And in that context, there are some things we can't control, but there are also some things we can control. And a lot of those things that are controlled by policymakers are just not going well. If the economy was better off, then everyone would be better off. If the economy was surging and employers were hiring, then many of the problems that we see would be solved by employers who would have the resources to attract and train the workers that they need. In my view, in our view, it's not a wealth distribution problem, it's a wealth creation problem facing our country. And I think Ms. Exner-Pirot articulated that in particular. And I wonder if you have additional suggestions you want to share with the committee in the time we have here about what changes the government needs to make to catalyze wealth creation that will address the unemployment crisis.
Yeah, good question. My internet's a little unstable, so hopefully this works out. You know, I am privileged that I also serve as an advisor to the Business Council of Canada, and that represents, you know, a couple hundred of Canada's largest employers. So I get some insight into the things that bother them. Obviously, you know, tax competitiveness, and we can, you know, we can point out all the terrible things, you know, the Trump administration is doing and the way that weighs down on them. But some of the things they've introduced, for example, I think no taxation on all their expenses if they build something for the first year. That is a huge. We've seen $17 billion from 7 members in the last 7 weeks go to the United States. Announcements, some of it by our own pension plan, by the way, the Canadian pension plan, announcing billions of dollars. You think, what could that $17 billion do here in Canada for our employment rate and for youth unemployment? And so it is some of it is purely tax competitiveness. Obviously, some of it is regulatory competitiveness. And it's the certainty. Business needs, especially in commodities, 10, 15, 20 years of certainty to decide to invest here. And they simply don't have that in Canada. And when they do member surveys of what are the top concerns for you, tariffs is not number one. Regulation is Canadian employers' top concern. And so having a line of sight, and I have to say having some bipartisan collaboration so that business investors know, doesn't matter what will happen in 4 years or in 8 years, we think Canada is going to be a safe jurisdiction to put our money. Anyways, I just don't think we look at competitiveness and how Canada competes on the global stage nearly enough as we want to diversify our customer instead of just using kind of that easy hook of going down south. Then we need to start being competitive with all countries, with all commodity producers. It's not just about getting that easy access to the American market anymore.
Thank you. Let's talk a bit more about Prime Minister Trudeau and Prime Minister Carney. Clearly, there's a difference of aesthetic. The two prime ministers have a difference of style, a different way of presenting. The tone is different. I'm interested in probing what is the substantive difference when it comes to policy that is impacting decisions that investors are making, particularly around energy. Have you seen changes, not of style or aesthetic, but of substance, that would shift the calculation that an investor makes from Prime Minister Trudeau's time in office to Prime Minister Carney's time in office now?
So we haven't, and it is true, and I think it's fair to say that people have noticed that maybe Canada's going to do things differently, and they're starting to kick tires. There is interest that maybe Canada is going to become a better jurisdiction for investment. But when you get into nuts and bolts of particular projects, again, and I'm hearing from these people, they can't go to their boards with new projects with better certainty, absolutely not in the resource sector, and absolutely not in oil and gas, with the emissions cap overhanging, with the clean electricity regulations overhanging. Obviously, with the tanker ban, you're not going to build another pipeline. So it is still not at a level where we get to indicators of more foreign investment and therefore more employment growth. And we're all hopeful, crossing our fingers, but I think the current strategy of the Major Projects Office in choosing 4 or 5 now and again is missing the point. If you had a good regulatory and policy environment, you would have hundreds of projects come forward. This country, second largest country in the world, can sustain hundreds of resource projects, and just choosing 4 or 5 at a time is not going to get us where we need to go.
Thank you.
That's right on time. We'll conclude this round with Ms. Fancy for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. And thank you all to the volunteer witnesses here coming today. We really appreciate the promptness. Sometimes you're not given a lot of time to come, so I really appreciate that. So I'm a former educator, for those of you that don't already know that, a high school principal, and dealing with a lot of vulnerable youth with various different backgrounds. So a lot of my questions, I have questions for 2 different groups today, but a lot of my questions are surrounding value-added systems and how do we scale some of these programs that you had mentioned in your intros that are really working well. So my first question I have is for Ms. Exner-Pirot. And in looking at, I'm also a new MP. So when we're talking a lot of the old government versus the new government, all I know within here as my role of a parliamentarian is the new. So I do want to highlight, since Prime Minister Carney has taken the chair, he has developed our major office for projects. He has developed our Build Canada Homes initiatives. We have been looking at investment within Canada and, east to west as well. And we also have to remember this has been a new government. Now, that being said, we are left with the numbers say, the vulnerability with our youth that are coming in and the skills mismatch we've discussed today. So with all of that, sorry, Ms. Exner, my question is, looking ahead, right? We have to look ahead. What elements do you think that are current federal supports have that you would recommend in preserving and or expanding upon in order to empower youth? And you can look at that in terms of youth in general or in terms of your expertise of Indigenous youth. Thank you.
Great question. I mean, Canada is still considered a safe and reliable country, and I do lament, the things that we could have done better, but there's not a lot of other great places where you would want to put your international capital these days. This should be an exceptional time for us to be competitive in global markets. And again, there's still a missing link, and I've heard it from some of our members. There is not a growth premium for Canada. That means that investors don't look at Canada and say, well, in 10 years, I also expect that there'll be some GDP growth. In fact, it's a negative. That means foreign investors looking at Canada and saying, I don't see a path that actually that's going to be a fast growing economy. And so that means that my investment in Canada is not going to get as much returns as, say, in country XYZ in Latin America or in Southeast Asia. So actually demonstrating that we are a growth economy and doing the things to make it into a growth economy. And again, just
So I'm sorry to cut you off there, but the question was regarding youth, not in terms of foreign economy. So I'm looking for things that we can do within youth. Thank you.
And I guess that is just my philosophical approach, that a hot economy with lots of foreign investment and lots of jobs growth is the one thing that will trickle down to help youth. And in particular, when we're talking about the resource sector, energy and critical minerals, as Minister Hodgson and Minister Carney often talk about, those are often construction jobs, and those do tend to prefer youth workers. So whether it's labor or skilled labor, those tend to be, and also easier to enter, whereas you might need 4 or 6 years for a professional degree to become a teacher, to become a lawyer. You can enter the trades, you can enter construction with maybe just a few months of education. So that's still my answer, I guess.
No, thank you very much there, Ms. Exner-Pirot. My other questions that I have are for Nicholas and Morgan. You had mentioned resiliency in your intro, and resiliency has kind of been the name of the game as myself as an educator in dealing with youth from many very vulnerable populations of people. My questions that I have for you, I have 3 of them. What mechanisms within federal programs have contributed to youth resilience and skill building? Thank you.
Thank you. So we're happy to answer. And first off, congrats on your election. My mother's from the Maritimes. I spend my summers around Mahone Bay. So it's an area I know well. And the reason I mentioned
that's my riding.
I know it is. Just there this summer. But the reason I mentioned that is because I think a lot of the reality of Quebec's English-speaking youth speak to some of the reality of the regional youth in your riding as well. We recently did a study on community revitalization, place-based community revitalization, and I think Morgan can speak to that and how that is a powerful approach that the federal government could leverage to build resilience for youth in particular.
Absolutely. So we see strong out-migration from rural and remote regions, in particular in Quebec, that is either into Montreal or into urban centers, and then oftentimes onto Ottawa, Calgary, Alberta, provinces that might not have language barriers or provinces that might be seen to have a different labor market context. And so what we are interested in seeing for our youth are programs like vocational training, like bridging programs, like partnerships or stages with employers that help them get their foot in the door, develop the employment skills and the language skills that they need in order to not only get that first taste of employment, but then to be able to stay in that line of work or in their community. And in terms of what federal investments are able to support that for our community in particular, as Nick mentioned, we did a survey of our network members of employment organizations serving English-speaking communities.
Thank you. Sorry, we have gone over. Thank you, Ms. Fancy. You can provide those comments directly to the committee through the clerk if you have something to add, any one of you after this. With that, I want to thank the panelists for appearing in the first hour. We'll suspend for 2 minutes while we transition to the next panel. Thank you, and we'll spend for 2 minutes. Suspend.
Thank you.
Committee members, welcome back to the second hour. Before we begin, I would just like to remind our joining panelists today to a couple of points. You can participate in this meeting in the official language of your choice. In the room, use interpretation services through the headset. I would ask that you get familiar with them before we begin and on the right language. Those appearing, let me go through this. Those appearing virtually, you can choose the language at the bottom of your surface. And if there's an issue in translation, please get my attention, raise your hand in the room, and on virtually, please use the raised hand icon. If there's an issue with the interpretation, I'll spend while it's being cleared. Before we begin, before I introduce the panelists, Mr. Jennings, you have a point?
Point of order, yes, Chair. There's been discussion among colleagues, and I think you'll find unanimous consent for the following: that the committee direct the analyst to prepare a draft travel proposal based on informal feedback from committee members following consultation with the parliamentary secretary and the vice chairs, and that the travel proposal be distributed to committee members for consideration as soon as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Jennings. Did you have a location?
I think I'd like to leave it the time we can for the witnesses, so I think that motion provides the door for informal consultation. So,
thank you. I'll follow up.
Appel au règlement, Monsieur le Président. Si possible, peut-être en lien avec ce que M. Jennings a dit, d'accorder un peu de temps à la prochaine rencontre pour peut-être discuter de cette motion puis d'une autre motion qu'on avait. Il y avait également la flamme du centenaire. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
après, nous avons reçu
Yes, once we receive the hard copy.
Formal motion, he was using it on consent, which was fine, and we'll follow up on that. So we'll continue with welcoming the witnesses to the panel, and again, please, members, direct all questions to myself, the chair. We have from Curtis, Mr. No, who do we have? Yes, from Curtis, Mr. Renze Nauta, Program Director, Work and Economics. From the Coalition of Concerned Manufacturers and Business of Canada, Catherine Swift, President. And from Polytechnique Canada, Sarah Watts-Renard, Chief Executive Officer. We'll begin with Mr. Nauta for 5 minutes or less, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Renze Nauta, and I'm representing Cardis, a public policy think tank where I run a research program on work and economics. All of our work at Cardis is centered on the idea that every human person has fundamental human dignity and that public policy should reflect that fact. In employment policy, this requires a recognition of the dignity of work and the fact that work is about more than just money. Of course, there is a financial component to work, as people bring home paychecks to support themselves and their families. And there is dignity in that. But even more fundamentally, the dignity of work means that the work itself, not just the paycheck, contributes to that person's flourishing. Everyone has something that they can offer, a talent or a gift, and their time. Work is about putting those at the service of others. This is ultimately what gives work its meaning, and it is through this gift of one's services that people connect with their community and help it to flourish. In other words, work makes people better people. And the data back this up. Cardis research shows that people who are employed have better physical and mental health. They have stronger marriages and family relationships. They are less likely to do drugs and commit self-harm. Work is also important in forming people in virtue, and it plays a significant role in keeping people, especially young people, out of crime. La question de l'emploi des jeunes à laquelle notre pays est
The question of youth employment that we're facing has to be viewed from that angle. Yes, there is a cost of living crisis in Canada, and young people have tremendous difficulty in making ends meet without even mentioning what they need to save to put a deposit down on a home. But an even greater concern is that a significant percentage of this generation risks being unable to benefit from the social and non-financial advantages of work if they don't experience work as a way of significantly contributing to the community.
Would have serious consequences both now and in the future. And I would like to focus in on one particular aspect of this problem that Cardis highlighted in a recent report. Our research found that a significant proportion of Canada's working class is over-credentialed for the jobs that they are doing. In this report, we define the working class as those working in jobs that do not require a post-secondary credential. But using data from Statistics Canada's Labour Force Survey, we found that over half of them have at least a college diploma, making them, by definition, over-credentialed for their jobs. Moreover, we found that this problem had worsened considerably over the last 20 years. From 2006 to 2024, the percentage of working-class people with a college diploma rose nearly a third, from 42 to 56%. The percentage of the working class with a university degree more than doubled, from 9 to 19%. This phenomenon is especially acute among young people, but the problem persists through all age categories, suggesting that the challenges that young people face in their early careers can have long-term effects throughout their working lives. We also looked at the demographic breakdown of this problem according to gender, region, industry, and immigration status, and we can get into that in the Q&A if you're interested. In short, many people are coming out of colleges and universities with diplomas and degrees that are simply not needed for the jobs that they end up in. Of course, education is more than just training for future jobs, but we should not underestimate young people's expectations that their diplomas are preparing them for the workforce. They are left with debt after many years of study with little to show for it. This in turn fuels credential inflation, as young people feel like they need higher and higher degrees to differentiate themselves from other workers in the labor market. I believe that this phenomenon accounts for a large portion of the feeling of frustration in our economy, and in the working class specifically, whereby people did what they were supposed to do, that is, get an education, but can't get ahead. It is a complicated problem, but part of the solution has to be to reorient our education systems so that they better align with the needs of labor markets. Young people should not be unduly pushed into higher education if that is not their calling. Our education systems should promote co-op programs to encourage students to have a better appreciation for the variety of legitimate career paths, such as the skilled trades that offer a fulfilling and lucrative future. Our report contains other policy recommendations, but as I assume that my time is coming to an end, I'll leave those for the Q&A. Thank you.
Nauta, a few seconds under. We'll go to Ms. Swift for 5 minutes or less. Ms. Swift? Ms. Swift, I believe you're on mute.
I'm sorry. Yes, my Coalition of Concerned Manufacturers and Businesses Canada, we mostly represent small and medium-sized businesses across Canada. As you may know, many young people find their first job in a small business, so this sector is a very important contributor to providing jobs for youth and setting young people on the path for a successful career and life. The past decade has not been a good time for small firms. They've faced higher taxes, increased regulatory burden, and a sluggish economy dragged down by bad government policy. Other countries have performed much better than Canada under the same global circumstances, which shows that our economic problems are self-inflicted. The massive expansion of the public sector at the expense of private sector growth has also meant an increased cost burden on the private sector and damaged our economic productivity. From 2019 to 2023, government employment grew by 13.3%, while the private sector grew by a mere 3.6%. The private sector, of course, pays for government, and naturally, this is not a sustainable path in future to have the money-consuming sector exceed the money-producing sector. As many people have pointed out, the reckless changes in the immigration system that did work well previously for decades has had a serious negative impact on youth employment and the economy. Abuse of the temporary foreign worker program, student visas, and so on is rampant, and yet the government doesn't seem to want to do anything about it. You can't pretend to be concerned about youth unemployment while not taking proper action to cut back on immigration that is not beneficial to Canada and not enforcing rules around things like student visas that are being abused. No more government programs are needed. In fact, many of them should be eliminated as they distort the labor market in inappropriate ways. What needs to be done is a reduction in overall taxation so there's much more money left in the hands of businesses to hire properly. Payroll taxes are especially damaging, as they are effectively a tax on jobs. They're also more punitive to small businesses because small firms are more labor intensive than our large businesses. We've seen increases in CPP and somewhat EI in previous years, but these have been particularly negative for small firms. We have a lot of members in the manufacturing sector, and one of their comments is that they found youth not willing to work in a manufacturing company, as it might involve shift work and other conditions that young people find inconvenient. A job for a young person in manufacturing can lead to a very well-paying career. Disincentives for youth to pursue such a job is unfortunate, not just for youth, but our manufacturing sector. We know we have a serious productivity issue in the Canadian economy, and manufacturers and the resource sector are the two biggest contributors to productivity. I must mention education system, even though it's not an area of federal jurisdiction per se. It focuses more on training our young people to become social justice warriors and neglects the basic skills that would equip our youth for future success. We spend a lot of money in Canada on our public education system, including in federal transfers to provinces, and bringing our children up in a system that does not prioritize basic skills like literacy, numeracy, and problem solving doesn't do our young people any favors. Our universities are especially bad. I've heard from a number of our members that they would rather hire young people right out of secondary school rather than let them be further indoctrinated in universities and then train them for whatever positions that apply. Small firms are sometimes criticized for not paying a high enough wage, but it's becoming more and more difficult for these firms to pay a high enough wage because of our taxation, overly costly regulations, and sluggish economy. All governments must face the reality that Canada is no longer an attractive place to start a career or business. All those statistics that we hear about billions of foreign and domestic investment fleeing Canada don't lie. If we don't address this soon, our youth will have a dismal future. We're a country with unmatched potential, but we've been crushed under the weight of bad government policies and declining freedoms. This needs to be reversed urgently if our country is to have a promising future. Finally, today's October 7th, the second anniversary of the most heinous, savage, and barbaric event in recent human history. How do you think the way Canada has responded in permitting more and more hate fests on our street and threats and disruptions to the lives of law-abiding Canadians, how do you think that affects our youth and their futures? Universities today are apparently having celebrations about the atrocities of October 7th. We should all be disgraced that's happening in Canada. Remember Canada's motto of peace, order, and good government? We don't have any of these in Canada right now. And unless government shows some courage and stop the increasingly violent hate fests on our streets and universities, the future will not bode well for youth or Canada as a whole.
Smith, and then we'll conclude with Ms. Renard for 5 minutes. Ms. Renard.
And thank you for the invitation to provide testimony to support your study on youth employment in Canada. I represent an association made up of Canada's polytechnics and institutes of technology. These institutions are leaders in the college sector, delivering hands-on training and experiential learning to nearly half of Canada's college population. They deliver advanced technical and technological education in close collaboration with industry. In fact, a study that we conducted in collaboration with the Conference Board of Canada earlier this year determined these institutions deliver programs that prepare graduates for 86% of the top 100 jobs in highest demand that require post-secondary credentials. The report illustrates strong labor market alignment in fields including healthcare, the skilled trades, advanced technology, and tourism and hospitality. These sectors consistently struggle to fill vacancies, and there's compelling evidence that polytechnic grads are in high demand. To keep the talent pipeline strong, business partners regularly donate equipment, participate in classroom instruction, and provide sizable philanthropic gifts. In 2025 alone, Imperial Oil donated a 40,000 square foot facility valued at $37 million to the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. Nutrien donated $15 million to Saskatchewan Polytechnic to support new campus development, and the British Columbia Institute of Technology raised $33 million from more than 45 donors to help build a new trades and technology complex. Labor market alignment also shows up in our graduate employment rates. Within 6 months of graduation, a vast majority, and more than 90% in some programs, are employed within their field of study. Polytechnic students learn by doing. They graduate both with competence and confidence to hit the ground running. And not only do they develop relevant skills in real-world projects undertaken alongside industry, but they develop employer networks while they do so. I had a conversation last week that illustrates my point. Magellan Aerospace in Winnipeg has 650 employees, 90% of which are graduates from RRC Polytechnic. This firm is heavily engaged in Canada's defence industry with technology and systems that are constantly changing. They partner with RRC Polytech to develop custom curriculum to stay ahead of their competitors and ensure they have the talent they need. In the past, youth graduating into an unfriendly job market have found refuge at post-secondary institutions. In fact, nearly a third of Polytechnic students have a previous credential or degree. Polytechnics have become finishing schools that translate theory into practical skills in high demand. So, how might you interpret that information to improve federal policies and programs? While the federal government cannot drive demand for young workers, it can help ensure that youth enter the labor market with recognizable skills for high-demand occupations. I recommend you review the current emphasis of the Student Work Placement Program. According to ESDC, only 9% of that funding supports wage subsidies for college-level diploma students. And while funding isn't tied to specific post-secondary institutions, the sectors this program prioritizes tend to favor university students. And there is an opportunity to better ensure that the program is being responsive to Canada's workforce needs. I also recommend that you consider opportunities to strengthen labour market development agreements with the provinces. In some parts of the country, public post-secondary institutions are sidelined from funds designed to connect skills with critical labour market demand, and that simply makes no sense. Finally, recognizing that higher levels of youth unemployment always accompany times of economic weakness, the federal government should continue to consider ways to help youth ride out this part of the economic cycle. When youth unemployment rates hit a prescribed level, for example, you might consider enriching student grants to make sure that staying in school continues to be an affordable option. Thank you for inviting me here today, and I'll look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Watts-Renard, for your presentation. We'll go to the questioning part of the meeting. We'll begin with Mr. Janis for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all the witnesses. I'll start with Ms. Swift. You talked about policy problems over the last 10 years. It's my observation that the government often wishes to direct attention towards external events. They say, well, if things are going badly, it's because of things beyond our control. We know in terms of the challenges with the American administration, the Liberals promised a deal by July 21st and haven't delivered on that promise. But speaking of the last 10 years, it seems clear that you're suggesting that that these are long-standing problems that have been emerging over time. I wonder if you can maybe preemptively respond to those who say all these problems are the result of external events beyond our control.
Well, you just have to look at the data. My background's economics, so I like to pay attention to that kind of thing. And we've seen all the charts that show other countries doing just fine in measurements such as GDP per capita. And GDP per capita is basically a proxy for our standard of living. So that's a pretty important measure for any country. And we're down at the bottom. We've seen, it's not, what I guess is really frustrating is that it's not mysterious as to why we're doing so badly. Our major industries have been discouraged. The resource, this has been mentioned by previous people, I won't belabor it, but a lot of legislation has been put in place to make building anything in Canada very, very difficult. We kowtow to a lot of green policies, so-called climate policies, whatever you want to call them, which has spent tons of taxpayer dollars on, are never measured, and never, to date, I haven't seen one of those predictions actually come true. All of these things contribute to a poor economy. And again, just compare ourselves to other countries. They're not having anywhere near the same trouble we are. So it's definitely self-inflicted. And finally, though, let's face it, if the economy is not going well, nothing's going well. And that goes for youth. It goes for anybody in the country. There's been far too much subsidies of businesses, and all the subsidy is benefiting one business at the cost of another, and often benefiting a weak business at the expense of a business who's paying taxes because they're being very successful. So these types of policies are long-term failures. They are very problematic, and as a number of people have pointed out, in an economic downturn, young people suffer the most, because that's when people say, well, I can't afford to hire a young person anymore, I'll have to train them and so on. And small businesses want to do that. I've heard from small firms that they say, we like to hire a student every summer, and these are sometimes 2 and 3 employee businesses, but when we can't afford to anymore because it costs us so much to do so, they're very disappointed, because small firms usually have a pretty good community orientation, and they want to help develop our next generation for a good future for the individual and the country.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to try to get one more question into you and then one question to another witness before the end of my time here. Could you just elaborate a little bit on what you said, problems of immigration contributing to youth unemployment? What are the areas where you've seen misalignment on immigration policy contributing to the current economic challenges and the unemployment issues?
Well, it seems to be mostly with the student visa program, and we know there are many, I've heard different numbers bandied about, but we know there's a serious number of visas that have expired. Our government immigration department doesn't seem to have any measurements of exactly how many that is, where these people are, and they should be leaving the country, of course, after their visa expires. That's how it works, supposedly, but that's not happening. So a lot of these people find themselves in various types of positions in small firms. We've heard of a lot in the hospitality industry, for example, and naturally that keeps out the young people that are truly Canadians and aren't on some kind of special temporary visa. And we've heard from a lot of young people who have applied to a ton of these, and they're looking for part-time work. They're looking for a summer job, maybe part-time while they go to university or secondary school or whatever, and they can't get those jobs because they're occupied by these people that, frankly, many of them are in Canada right now.
Thank you. In the time I have left, I'd like to go to you, Mr. Nauta. Now, you spoke about people getting credentials that maybe they would expect to be able to use in the labor market that they're not able to use, and then they've spent time doing studies, accumulating knowledge, but knowledge that they're not actually able to use in the course of their jobs. There are different levers when it comes to education at the federal and provincial level. One option might be for the federal government to look at the levers that it has and say, we're going to try to send some signals around to try to reflect the signals of the labor market in terms of student support. I wonder if you could reflect on that and how exactly the federal government might engage this issue of some credentials more likely to lead to employment versus others less likely to lead to employment.
Thank you, Mr. Jennis. I'm sorry you'll have to reflect on that at another time.
Chair, I have 20 seconds, and I think my colleague's phone shows the same. So.
Yeah. Continue. Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. I think that although education is primarily a provincial responsibility, the nature of the policy in the last several decades has been that the federal government has taken more responsibility in that area in terms of funding. Canada Social Transfer comes to mind. Workforce development agreements certainly come to mind as well. To your point, I do agree. I think what our data show is that having some sort of signal, some sort of price signal to indicate, where students should be preferencing their time in the post-secondary period would be valuable. It doesn't mean that education is entirely about how it's going to get, what kind of skills it's going to give them for the workforce. Obviously, there are other things involved in education, but it is an important part of what students are expecting, and so I think it would be a benefit to them to have some sort of signal as to what the labor market is demanding.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it was the 6-minute round, not the 5. Sorry about that. Who is Ms. Gutrakis for 6 minutes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all our witnesses for your testimony here this afternoon. My first question is to Ms. Swift, and I'm looking for some clarification. In your testimony, you said that there are far too many subsidies and they're too expensive or they cost too much. Would you be able to define for me, please, what that costs too much means?
Go again. There we go again. Yep. Okay. Generally speaking, government programs do not favor small businesses. There usually a fair bit of paperwork has to be filled out to access them and so on, and they tend to benefit larger firms more than smaller firms. So what I'd like to see, I mean, anybody, I guess, can have a subjective opinion as to what's too much and what's too little, but when you find small firms in particular struggling to obtain some kind of subsidy or some kind of thing to incent their hiring of young people, and then of course you have to tax them to pay for that program. So it's much better to leave the money in the business's hands to spend how they choose, because we've seen a lot of evidence over the years that they make much better decisions for their own business, usually because their own livelihood is at stake in the process, than some government bureaucrat does. So what I'd really like to see, because there's such a plethora of programs of many, many different kinds, but there's very rarely any measurement of how effective they are. And if we could have sunset clauses on a lot of these programs so that they basically went away, they died in a few years or whatever is an appropriate time period, and then have an assessment as, did they really create jobs? Did they really do what they were intended to do? We don't have that now. So many of these programs aren't measured at all, and often they're driven more by political concerns than economic concerns, such as, what riding is this business in? Are they in a riding that my party won the last election in? And, those kinds of things. I've just seen that far too often over the years, and that's not a good criteria for spending taxpayer money. It should be measurable, and it should boost the economy, not simply be a politically motivated slush fund. And, of course, we've seen subsidies to really inappropriate industries, and maybe it doesn't seem to directly involve the whole youth unemployment issue. But when you're spending billions and billions on failed businesses, EV, electric vehicles is a very good example of that, actually. We've seen many fiascos in that area. That takes money away from the ability of every business in the economy, not just small firms, to be able to hire properly and pay their employees properly as well.
I want to say, and for all the Canadians who are watching us today, that small business in Canada has one of the lowest tax rates in the G7. So I'm trying to follow very intently your testimony, and I have to admit, I'm feeling a little bit confused, because on the one hand, you're saying we're spending a lot of money on subsidies and they're not really going to the small businesses. Earlier in your testimony, you said small businesses would like to train young people, but they find that training is too expensive. So are you saying that subsidies that are currently available that small businesses can also have access to are not enough? Or are you saying that we have to eliminate them altogether? What is it that you think small businesses need in order to develop, the young, and to attract them, to incentivize them to want to go into skilled trades? I'm having a hard time trying to balance the two.
Well, when you refer to the lowest tax rate in the G7, you're referring to the corporate tax rate for small business. And unfortunately, that's that's just one very small part of the pie. In fact, corporate tax rates are one of the least problematic tax rates because a business has to be making money to pay corporate taxes. The more problematic taxes are the payroll taxes, which I mentioned, which a business pays whether it's making money or not, and they could be losing money and, of course, still have to pay those taxes. Property taxes, which are not federal. Things like health. There's health taxes in some provinces. Ontario has a health tax. All of those taxes that do not rely on whether the business is actually making any, any money are the most problematic taxes. So you have to add up that whole burden.
Yeah,
the whole
thank you, Ms.
regulatory
Swift.
red
I'm
tape-
sorry, my time is running out, and I do have one more question. Thank you for that. My next question is to Ms. Watts-Reinhardt. And in your testimony, you were talking about programs that may not be really delivering for students. And I'm just wondering, are there provinces that have particularly strong partnerships with federal programs in delivering youth employment outcomes through polytechnics that you're aware of and that you can speak to?
I think that across the country, there are some programs that are very successful when it comes to starting in getting that sort of first experience. And what we've seen is that doesn't necessarily incent ongoing retention and completion. And maybe I just point to the skilled trades as an example. There are some really great programs that have come out of the government to provide wage subsidies for apprentices that are just getting started in the skilled trades. But the difficulty is retention and completion is where we struggle. And so I think that there are a number of programs that are designed for that first experience. And when youth unemployment rates are high, what we actually find is that you don't always get into the field in which you were studying, but what you do find is that you have those experiences are the things that people fall back on.
Thank you, Ms. Katrakis. Madame Gill, pour 6 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the witnesses who are with us today and who are explaining and sharing their views and perspectives. I have some comments for each of you. First of all, Ms. Swift, this might surprise you, but I do agree with you. There are too many government subsidies, particularly for fossil fuels. The Bloc Québécois believes that this is the energy of the past, and we believe that money should have most likely gone elsewhere, probably to Quebec for the softwood lumber industry. When it comes to jurisdictions regarding Quebec, I don't want to talk about education in other provinces. We had a witness. We heard the Quebec Chamber of Commerce Federation, who pointed out that in Quebec, youth unemployment was not the same issue, or the issue didn't take the same form in Quebec. And there was an interesting cooperation between education and businesses in order to help young people enter the workforce. So useful. There is something there that we can draw inspiration from. I also heard Mr. Nauta saying something I found interesting. He talked about dignity. When we talk about unemployment, yes, it is alarming in some areas more than in others, but it is always concerning wherever it is because it is affecting a greater number of young people. We want them to contribute to the economy. We've also talked a lot about the crisis. So coming back to dignity, what is your view of the social safety net now in place? Because if young people don't have jobs, they are in difficulty. Do you believe that the current employment insurance system is doing what it's supposed to do? And if not, what could be done instead to help young people keep their dignity, find jobs? I'm thinking of my riding, which is a rural riding with a lot of natural resources. A great deal of development needs to be done, and many young people who are fishers, who are in the forest industry, are simply not able to make ends meet through the whole year. I'm listening. Thank you for the question. I will begin in French. To be specific, or to be more specific, I will carry on in English. When it comes to dignity, well, dignity is fundamental for everyone. And we need to remember that there are a number of aspects to dignity.
Fundamental human dignity. I think that's something that can never be taken away from anyone, no matter what's done to the person or what their working conditions or living conditions are. At the same time, what we want is for people's living conditions and for public policy to reflect the human dignity that they hold inherently. I think that public policy has a very difficult balancing act to accomplish when it comes to this. On the one hand, like you say, employment insurance and other aspects of a social safety net have to be there to ensure that the living conditions of someone do reflect the dignity that the person holds by virtue of their personhood. And there are certain basic elements that everyone needs to live a dignified life. At the same time, and this is what my remarks were trying to get at the beginning, there's another aspect of dignity, which is the ability of a person to contribute to their community and to their neighbors and to their families that arises out of work itself. And that's something that we can't ignore either. So I think this is where programs like the employment insurance program have sought a balance between ensuring that we're supporting people when they need it, but also in a way that gives them an on-ramp back into employment. And so that's so the Working While on Claim program, for example, is a way that I think the program has sought to do that. That's something that I would certainly endorse and that we've recommended for the Canada Disability Benefit as well. So I hope that just starts to answer your question a little bit in the sense that there is that balancing act to achieve.
Est-ce qu'il me reste du temps, Monsieur le Président?
Do I still have time, Chair? You talked about maintaining a balance, and I imagine that we can't reform the entire system, but some aspects of it can be. In a crisis, we still need to have available manpower because otherwise businesses will have difficulties because they'll have to go look for employees elsewhere. Could something be done for young people to make sure they have a social safety net, one that would encourage them to remain in the workforce and would help them get into the workforce? Thank you for the question.
One of the things that your question makes me think of is another recommendation that we have in the report about the over-credentialed working class, and that's the importance of lifelong learning. So often when there are different kinds of unemployment, but when someone becomes unemployed because of a structural problem in the economy, where their skills are no longer needed by an industry or something like that, then it calls for a different approach, and EI might be part of it, but EI probably also needs to be paired with some support for lifelong learning, and this is especially acute given the data that I was pointing to about how many institutions don't always do a very good job of preparing people for the workforce, and which means that people will need more micro-credentials as they go forward. So anyway, I hope this is answering your question in a way. Okay.
Merci, Madame Gill. Now to Mr. Reynolds for 5 minutes. Mr. Reynolds.
I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming here today. Really appreciate it. Mr. Nauta, I'm a construction electrician by trade. I've been a construction electrician for 20 years. I have seen many apprentices and people coming into the building trades that are definitely over-credentialed. I've seen it countless times, so many I can't even count. In your opinion, would you say that workers are coming out over-credentialed because there weren't any jobs that were available for them in their chosen field? Like, essentially, would you find some of our education institutions are selling a bill of bad goods?
Well, to answer the question, I think it's effectively an issue of supply and demand. In that there are certain occupations where there is an oversupply of skills, and then there are other ones where there is an undersupply of skills. We see you mentioned the skilled trades and the building trades. That's certainly one right now where there is a shortage, but by contrast, I think what our report shows is that there are other occupations, especially ones that formally require higher education in terms of university degrees and that kind of thing, where clearly, according to our data, which is Statistics Canada data, there is an oversupply of those skills. So I would agree with your point in that respect, that there is an oversupply. I would say that to the second part of your question, my hope is to send a message to post-secondary institutions that they do need to be responding to the labor market, but even before that, I think students need to consider what the reality of entering the workforce is with a particular diploma or with a particular degree, so what post-secondary institutions are telling students and what guidance counselors and high schools are telling students, I think should matter to this committee and to Parliament, because it isn't necessarily setting everyone up for success. It certainly does for some people, but for others, there could be a better job done.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. My next question is for you, Ms. Watts-Renard. I'm actually alumni of Red River College Polytechnic. I've been there a few times. Obviously, being a construction electrician, that's where I got my red seal from. Canada's post-secondary school system contributes to a troubling rise in unemployment among young Canadians by steering students towards universities instead of trades and technical careers. Or do you find that they're steering Canadians towards universities versus technical jobs?
I don't think that happens in the post-secondary institutions. I think that's happening much earlier. My sense is, even my own children, when they were going through the K-12 system, they were encouraged not to do trades-related programming. And, you're too smart for this. You should be, leaving spaces in those programs for those that need it, and pushed in a university route, whether that was what they wanted or not. And that continues to be a challenge today.
Yeah, I've definitely seen that myself. The overall attitude towards skilled trades, and not just building trades, but skilled trades. I mean, we could be talking machinists, we could be talking mechanics, all skilled trades. I've definitely seen a push for that in, K-12. So what would you suggest we could do to change attitudes of society in general to say, hey, skilled trades is not just for people who can't hack university?
Well, I mean, part of that is trying to give experiences, I think, during the course of the entire education journey, give experiences with different kinds of learning and different kinds of career paths. But, I will point out in terms of what it is that the federal government might do. I mentioned earlier about the Canadian Apprenticeship Service and providing first-year wage subsidy to get apprentices started in the process. I think a big challenge with why young people choose not to go into the trades is not necessarily because they don't think that these are good careers. The experience is that only 50% of the people who go into a skilled trades pathway come out the back end with their red seal. And I think that's hugely problematic, which really means we need to incent retention and completion and try and make sure that the people who do choose to go into those careers see the finish line. And that's something that is offered in lots of diploma and degree and certificate programs, but is exceptionally difficult when it comes to the skilled trades.
Nerd, and thank you, Mr. Reynolds, for your insightful questions. Now to Madame Desrochers for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair.
Écoutez, premièrement,
First of all, for Canadians who are listening, I'd like to quickly set the record straight, because I think some of the things being said about the Canadian economy need correcting. For example, we have the lowest deficit in the G7. We have the lowest level of debt among G7 countries, and our debt to GDP ratio is the lowest in the G7 as well. So I believe that our economy, in spite of all the challenges we're facing at the moment, as are many other countries, we are still doing relatively well. I would like to thank the witnesses for the recommendations that you've made to us, the very tangible measures that you think we might take. We really appreciate it, particularly Ms. Watts-Reiner. You talked about realigning apprenticeship programs in some sectors, and the data you provided. You said only 9% of college degree students end up in their jobs.
Launch the Major Projects Office, Build Canada Home, which, with clear commitment and clear, signals, a new policy to buy Canadians, Defense Investment Agency, increasing our defense spending, including clear message that we need to increase our recruitment and retention in our armed forces, as well as a defense industrial strategy that's going to come out. In my opinion, all of those are really geared towards a lot of the skills trade, a lot of supporting skills trade employment. So my question to Ms. Watts-Reiner and Mr. Nauta is, do you think these are good enough signal to send to Canadians that these are the areas that where we really need, sorry for the interpreter, these are the areas where we need youth to go and study, and these are the places that will be good jobs? Do you think there's more we need to do? And I really, je sais ma collègue du Bloc québécois la question.
I know that my colleague from the Bloc québécois was talking about skills and the education system. You talked about the gap between what students learn and actually need on the job market. And that gap remains.
In my view, the signals are that there's a high need for skilled tradespeople, and I think that youth are hearing that. When I think about how the federal government might improve some of the programs, I'll tell you, my son-in-law is an electrical apprentice. He is just about to go back to technical training. I mean, my previous job, I was the executive director of the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum, so I have a strong understanding of Canada's apprenticeship system. And my sense is when he tells me I can't figure out what kinds of supports are available to me while I go back to school, that's a problem. I mean, he's a 29-year-old. He's a smart guy doing a difficult trade, and he is talking about trying to navigate a system that includes the Canada Apprenticeship Loan, it includes unemployment insurance, and he's trying to figure out, how can I even afford to go back to school? And so I think the signals are there that the occupations are in high demand and that they are valuable careers. We do have a parity of esteem issue, but that's separate. But I think that there are probably some ways that we could improve the barriers that stand between someone who starts and someone who finishes.
Thank you for the question. I think the new agencies that I think you've listed, I think are could be necessary for the functioning of government and for moving things forward in the government, and I certainly hope that they do. But what I would say about signals to students in terms of the workforce is that it's most important that the markets send those signals. I'm not sure that it's the best idea for government to be sending those signals, except insofar as it's trying to correct a period of esteem issue, whereby historically or more recently, certain occupations have been said to have less dignity, or what might have you. So, but I would say that the correction for that isn't. I think politicians can be speaking from their perch to speak to the importance of these other kinds of occupations. But in terms of how students and workers are making those decisions, we want as much of that to come from the market as possible. So that might actually involve getting government sometimes a little bit out of the way in terms of the messaging, and so there can be more room for employers to have to indicate that.
Thank you.
Okay, Madame Gill, pour 2 minutes et 30 seconds.
Ms. Gill, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. I will put a last question to each of the witnesses. It's difficult to generalize, since there are many different kinds of young people from different regions living in different economic situations. Some of them are studying. So the ones who are studying are unemployed, but they're not available to work. So, or they're studying part-time, but not entirely available to work. So what are the main reasons, the main causes we should be tackling? As we've said in recent weeks, it's been over 20 years that we've seen higher unemployment among young people than among anyone else. So what are we to do to have a genuine impact? This question is to all of you. And if you don't have time to give a full answer, please do provide it in writing.
Well, I'll start. I think you're right to point to the complexity of the issue, because it's not just one thing. One thing that I haven't had a chance to talk about much in this committee yet is the fact that while some of the overcredentialed working class is born in Canada, and part of the problem, therefore, is how our post-secondary institutions are aligning with the labor market. In many cases, it's also immigrants who find themselves in the working class, but who may have credentials from abroad that are not recognized here. And so that's just an example of how this issue hits the population in two very different ways. I think you can see that could be that could happen along many different demographic differences as well. But that's one that I would point to. So if there's one cause that I would point to that I haven't had a chance to talk to, it's about that foreign credential issue.
Maybe to add to that, I do think that there is a sense that young people are not always fully available to work, absolutely. but they're all looking for a way to contribute, and that way can be through experiential learning. That's something that we've seen. You don't need to be in the labor market to participate in experiential learning programs, whether that's something in technology or in healthcare. And so those learning programs that will bring experience into the classroom prepare people for the workplace. And I think that's where we see higher postgraduate employment rates is where students have had those opportunities during school.
Madame Gill, we will conclude with a round with the opposition and the government. Ms. Falk for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, thank you to our witnesses. Ms. Watts-Reynolds, I just want to thank you for pointing out what private business does for education. I'm in the neck of the woods where a lot of energy companies are donating space, they're donating learning, they're donating the experience for a lot of these people, young adults, even adults, because a lot of people are going back to the trades after they've already received a degree, to get their experience that they then need to be able to go into the workforce. So I think it's important to recognize that that's not coming from government, that's coming from the businesses that are employing our constituents and Canadians across the country. Mr. Nada, I just was wondering, you had spoke about the dignity of a person, and I'm just wondering, why is employment particularly important for young people in helping them to build that positive future? So I kind of see that as a foundation, that we need that for, the next step in life.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So employment has a different character than some other spheres of life, in that there are certain expectations that if you don't meet them, you won't necessarily last long in the workplace, and that can sound quite negative, but in fact it's a positive thing. I should broaden that out, though, to say that the dignity of work, it doesn't come fundamentally from that. It comes from the fact that it is a place where people typically spend about 40 hours a week. Obviously, there can be more or less than that, but it is a significant portion of your time in which a person is putting the services that they have at to the benefit of other people. It is one of the few places that people also encounter strangers. Someone comes into a shop. One of the first questions that they'll ask is, "Have you been served?" or may I help you? And so it's one of the few places where we actually interact with people we don't know in a positive way. I think this contributes to a sense of service. It contributes to a sense of virtue as well in how we interact with the world. So fundamentally, like I said earlier, it's about taking your talents and your gifts and your time as well and putting it at the service of other people. And work is one of in the workplace is one of the fundamental places that we do that. I should broaden that out. You want to get it, but I should broaden that out briefly to say that work obviously encapsulates a lot more than that, and could be work in the family home as well, where the same functions are taking place.
For sure. Okay, thank you. I know I've been a long time standing member of this committee, and we've done a lot of different studies over the years. One of them was experiential learning. We did do a study on that, and I was shocked to hear witness testimony saying to high school students, don't go into that trade. That's a dirty job. You don't want to be a plumber. You don't want to be a scaffolder. That you need to go to university. I was shocked to hear that. I come from a very resource-enriched, agriculture-enriched area, and that's how we survive, is the trades. And actually how we all survive. We need people. We're in a housing crisis. We need tradespeople to be building our homes, to building our infrastructure across this country. So I'm just wondering, for any of the witnesses here, have you seen any good examples in Canada or elsewhere where young people are better supported to go directly into trades or other non-degree career paths?
There are certainly programs. Really, every province does have programs that are designed to try and capture people, usually in high school, to go direct into trades programs, for example. I think we just have to accept that the programs themselves are clunky and often used as a way to capture people that they're actually fearful will not graduate high school, rather than really thinking about long-term careers. So those programs exist, and I think some are successful for some people, but the pathway is not nearly smooth enough. And if somebody who said, I'd like to go into the skilled trades, is really good in math, I guarantee you the career counselor will say you should go to university first, including, unfortunately, some tradespeople would say that.
Interesting description, Ms. Watson. Clunky. I think it does define too many.
Can I just add? Could I just add that?
Our time, Ms.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're out of time.
Yes, we have to conclude with Monsieur Joseph pour 5 minutes. Monsieur?
Mr. Joseph, 5 minutes. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our witnesses for being here today. We appreciate it. Last week, we heard other witnesses talking about youth unemployment. Young people who come from diversity, and when I say diversity, I mean a number of different aspects, be it people of different origins, different religion, people living with a disability. So, Ms. Watt, I would like to know, in your opinion, what is the rate of unemployment among people with from diversity communities? Well, in fact, it is double that of other young people. And what do you think the root causes of this are?
My sense is that within institutions, we are still finding that there's a self-chosen pathways that sometimes speak to what we think is going to be in high demand, and then find that that is not necessarily the case. So I think we're giving young people some direction when, for example, they're in high school, they're coming from an immigrant community, where the sense is we want to sort of head for the gold level standard. And if you think about some of the language that is used, particularly when we're talking about an immigrant population, about wanting the best and the brightest, what you actually mean is you want PhDs, not that you want people who are going into the skilled trades. And that's the underlying message that is being given to, I think, youth of regardless of their background. And those are things that we have to be able to address. If it's about workforce demand, we shouldn't have policies and procedures in place that are designed to say, if you're a graduate student or if you're a PhD, then you get better treatment than you will if you decide to go and do a technical occupation.
Ok, merci beaucoup, mais je parlais pas que de l'immigration.
Thank you, but I wasn't talking only about immigration, but people with disabilities. Disabilities have no race or borders. Other witnesses have clearly said that immigrants don't necessarily want to work, but others say the opposite. At the same time, some people accuse young people of not wanting to work in manufacturing, so I'm a little bit confused. Could you advise us how we could, or what we could do to change the attitudes of these people saying such things?
I would say that one of the answers is that I think we as a society have to get past the idea that there's menial work and then there's intellectual work. You know, that is a false distinction, and it's an unhelpful one. And so I think, and this goes back to the parity of esteem issue that Ms. Watts-Reinert was speaking about earlier. I think we have to send the message that there is no menial work, that work has value and work has dignity, regardless of who is doing it or what the work is. Doesn't mean that it's going to be valued the same way in the market, but that doesn't mean that it isn't valuable to the person. And that's really, I guess, the message of what I'm trying to get at with the dignity of work. And for too long, we have overvalued certain kinds of career paths at the expense of others. And so a strong message from this committee or from Parliament or from the Government of Canada to indicate that there is no menial work, that work can be meaningful regardless of the nature of it, would I think go a long way to that.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur.
Thank you.
Écoutez.
If I have 10 seconds left, I will certainly let them go because I've been satisfied with the answers.
About people with disabilities. Yeah. May I? So just to say that that's an area of research focus that we have done as well at Cardis to indicate that in the same way, people with disabilities need to be given opportunities in the labor market as well, and so. Efforts in that respect are very important. I think we have to look to model employers who incorporate people with disabilities into their operations. Would be. I would have a lot more to say, but I know that, Mr. Chair, you're out of time.
We're pushing time.
I just ask, I know Ms. Swift wanted to respond to my question. I just asked that if she can supply that in writing.
Sure.
To the question that I had previously. Thank you.
If you had something that you wanted to add, you can always submit it, written text to the clerk. So with that, thank the witnesses, committee members. Our next meeting is on Thursday, where we continue with the study. With that, is it the will of the committee to adjourn? Adjourn.